For a little bit more on this, let's cross now to SABC correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease to give us an update. Sherwin, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I was watching this thing last night, so I'm a little bit tired, and it did go on for an age. And I'm going to say, I mean, it was all about setting the rules, but listening to the language, you might have thought actually that these were opening arguments for the actual trial. Take us through it.
It definitely felt that way, didn't it, Peter? I absolutely agree that I think opening arguments have been made already, despite the fact that we are going to hear new opening arguments when the trial officially gets underway at about 1 p.m. Eastern time, around 8 p.m. South African time. So essentially what yesterday was, despite them debating the rules, the McConnell rules proposal, it was essentially a dress rehearsal for, I think, what we will see today. What I can tell you is Democrats came very well prepared. They introduced 11 amendments. This is why this process went up until 2 a.m. local time in the early hours of Wednesday morning. But there were some victories for the Democrats in terms of the Republicans bowing to some pressure from within their own caucus. Initially, the rules proposal presented by Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, would have limited opening arguments to 24 hours over 2 days. That has now been extended to 3 days. So essentially, we're not going to have 12-hour sessions without a break. If you start at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, as is what is being set here for this trial, essentially arguments could have gone until 1 a.m. in the morning without a break. So that didn't seem plausible. So they bowed to pressure on that, so they're spreading those opening arguments over 3 days. And another measure that he bowed on was allowing the evidence collected in the House impeachment inquiry to be automatically entered into the record of the Senate trial without objection. Initially, any bit of evidence from the House that needed to be included in the Senate trial would have to have been voted on and received a majority for it to be included. That has now been done away with. So small victories here for the Democratic Party, but essentially Mitch McConnell able to keep his caucus in check. All those amendments were shot down, including appeals for new witnesses and documents to be released from various departments, including the White House, State Department, and the Department of Defense. All those amendments shot down. We do understand that there might be another opportunity later in the Senate process, Peter, for witnesses yet to be called and for documents yet to be subpoenaed, but we haven't crossed that bridge yet.
All right, so I don't know if yesterday was an indicator of what's going to happen next, but the rules of the road, we've been given them now, as it were, and I guess the question is, how will the rest of the process play out? When could we have a vote on this impeachment?
Yeah, nothing like a good dose of speculation in this conversation, Peter. Look, I mean, essentially, Mitch McConnell has made it very clear that he wants this to be done and dusted in the shortest possible time. This is why this rules package was debated until 2 a.m. in the morning, because Democrats fear they want a hasty trial, they want to dismiss this trial and not call additional witnesses and evidence. If Republicans, if new motions are not produced after opening arguments, the 24 hours for the prosecutorial team, 24 hours for the defense team, spread over 3 days. That takes us essentially into next week. Then you have 16 hours of senators being able to submit written questions based on what they've heard to that point through the Chief Justice, John Roberts. That's another 16 hours. So we're looking at sort of the end of next week. And then the big question, are they going to request additional documentation from the White House? Will the White House call for an executive privilege motion in that sense to block those subpoenas? Will they call John Bolton? Will they call Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff? Will the White House call for executive privilege in that sense? So all those kind of permutations could delay this process. Mitch McConnell wants a short trial. The Democrats want new evidence and witnesses. So we don't know quite how that will play itself out after opening arguments and after senators are given the opportunity to raise objections or questions.
Well, the man at the center of all of this, President Trump, he's in Davos in Switzerland, and I believe that he's actually made some comments about the process so far. What has he had to say?
Yeah, Trump speaking to reporters just ahead of his departure from Davos, heading back to the United States, and no doubt glued to cable television on Air Force One, asked specifically about whether he still wants to see witnesses testify. Remember, the president is on record as saying he'd love John Bolton to testify. He'd love the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to testify. But now appears to be making a case that if Bolton were to testify, Peter, this might raise some national security concerns. Let's listen.
I would rather go the long way. I would rather interview Bolton. I would rather interview a lot of people. The problem with John is that it's a national security problem. You know, you can't have somebody who's at national security. And if you think about it, John, he knows some of my thoughts. He knows what I think about leaders. What happens if he reveals what I think about a certain leader and it's not very positive, and then I have to deal on behalf of the country? It's going to be very hard. It's going to make the job very hard. He knows other things, and I don't know if we left on the best of terms. I would say probably not, you know, and so you don't like people testifying when they didn't leave on good terms, and that was due to me, not due to him. And so we'll see what happens. But when you have a national security, you could call it presidential prerogative. You could just call it, the way I look at it, I call it national security for national security reasons. Executive privilege, they say.
Essentially, the president now making the argument that this could impugn the nation's national security. And what is Article 1 of this impeachment trial? Abuse of power. What are Democrats alleging the president did? That he undermined the country's national security by withholding military assistance that had been earmarked for Ukraine by the United States Congress and Senate. He then blocked that aid for weapons in their defense with their war on the Eastern Front against Russia. They believe that the president was undermining the country's national security. The president now saying that if John Bolton were to testify, that, in fact, would undermine U.S. national security.
All right, so going back to what happened yesterday and what this trial really in the end is going to be, as people suspect, it's a party versus party kind of trial. The Democrats are holding hope that at least 4 Republicans might be sympathetic to the Democratic cause, and that's what's going to need to happen.
Yeah, the backdrop to all of this, Peter, is that we are in an election year, and there are a number of moderate Senate Republicans in states where they might very well, according to polling that we are seeing, lose those elections. So the electorate watching very closely whether they will live up to the oath that they've taken ahead of the Senate trial to render impartial justice. So what you will also see in this trial is Democrats, because we don't know if they'll be able to call witnesses and documents, they are going to paint a picture. They are going to use graphics. They are going to use evidentiary video from the impeachment trial in their opening arguments, making the case as to why Republican senators should convict this president and remove him from office. Adam Schiff, the lead impeachment manager in that trial, in those opening remarks yesterday, saying, we are here to make it as difficult as possible for you to acquit the president. So their role, despite not being able to call witnesses, possibly later, or new documents, is to paint a picture. And so placing a great deal of pressure on those 4 Republicans from Maine, Colorado, Tennessee. There's a retiring senator from Tennessee, a Republican. And when you retire, Peter, in this kind of political dynamic, you can actually do what you want. So perhaps a little bit of fear in the Republican caucus as to what certain senators might do.
All right, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed, as always, for your insights and keeping us up to date with that story. All right, and that's Sherwin Bryce-Pease reporting for us, our correspondent in New York. Big story, and he'll keep us up to date day by day with the blows taking place in that impeachment trial